Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second half of APAICS' 2021 Energy Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, and I'm pleased to present to you our next two panel discussions. First, I'd like to thank our event partners, the American Petroleum Institute, the National Resources Defense Council, Southern California Edison, and Toyota. Opportunities to discuss policy and how it affects the API community are critical to keeping a dialogue open for all of our stakeholders. To start us off, we'll be talking about innovation in the energy market with two experts in the field. I want to introduce Hara Wang of the Rocky Mountain Institute, who will facilitate this conversation. Hara is a market sector lead with RMI Ventures and works to build collaboration between startups, investors, and corporations to accelerate early-stage energy and climate innovations. Her past work experience includes time at Braemar Energy Ventures and McKinsey & Company. Hara, welcome, and thank you for leading this important discussion.
Thank you, Madeline. Hi, everybody. This is Hara Wang, and because I recently just got a promotion, so some of the title have changed, and I'm currently the head of investments and fund partnerships at Third Derivative. And I've been working with Third Derivative, which is a collaboration between Rocky Mountain Institute and New Energy Nexus at helping early stage startups to cross multiple different valleys of death in their pathway to commercialize. The way we see this world is a lot of new climate technologies need to move towards commercialization in order for us to really solve the 1.5 degree challenge. We work across sectors with entrepreneurs that's tackling challenges in building, transportation, industry, electricity, and agriculture sectors. We work with entrepreneurs globally, and then we also work with an ecosystem of investor and corporate partners to help these startups with later stage investment capital and later stage corporate commercialization opportunities. We work very closely with Rocky Mountain Institute, whose market research has been super supportive and helpful in for us to understand what is the market landscape and understand what are the key technology areas to focus on. But me aside, I'm super excited to introduce Tanush, who is the Vice President of Market Innovation of Uplight, which is a great example of a startup that has crossed multiple valleys of death and then seen commercial successes in a very tough and challenging sector. So Tanush, turn it over to you. Would you like to make an introduction?
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Having some audio. Okay, great, fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Hara, and thanks to this group for the invitation to participate today. So my name is Tanush Jura. I'm currently the Vice President of Market Innovation for a software as a services clean tech company called Uplight. We formed just over 2 years ago through the merger of 5 software services companies that were all mission aligned in helping utilities and other energy providers decarbonize by empowering their customers to make energy smart decisions. I've spent about 15 years, a little over 15 years in the clean energy space and a little bit in clean tech before that as well in the chemical industry, including in the bulk power system, working for a big wind developer, working in management consulting, also a McKinsey alum like Hara, and then working in state government as well, and then at a not-for-profit think tank before I joined Uplight. So got to see a lot of different things over the last decade and a half, and really excited about what we can do to help drive more innovation and more commercialization of the technologies that we've got to fight climate change.
Tanush, this is a great, fantastic background. As a C-stage investor myself, I certainly have seen my fair share of failures in the market. Many of the C-stage investments don't pan out because they can't find the right product market fit. They can't get their first commercial validation done, or a lot of things can even if the technology has a lot of promise, there could be a lot of challenges as the technology moves through the different phases of commercialization. Uplight is an example of startups that turn into a commercial success. Can you speak a little bit about how that experience have been and how Applied specifically have navigated all these commercialization challenges. Tanush, are you still there? I think we may have lost Tanush. I think as we are waiting for Tanush to come back, I can start with some of my thoughts on this, if that's okay. Great. As we're waiting for Tanush to come back, I'm personally happy to share some of my thoughts. As a early stage seed stage investor in this space, I think for us, and it goes to kind of third derivatives theory of change and how we build our model. It's really important that in the early stage, as we are developing the thesis around what technology will be the best technology to tackle the particular challenge, but also think through, in order for that technology to commercialize, what are all the other partners that need to be involved in the value chain? Think through what type of capital needs to be raised from a venture capital and project financing perspective. Think through how they consider risk, and then chart through a path towards de-risking the technology so that it can attract lower and lower cost of capital. And also think through who are all the different commercial partners that can be engaged. What are the partners that's willing to take some of the earlier stage risk and then work alongside a startup in order to develop new programs? And what are some of the partners who are a little more risk averse and who are only interested if there are certain commercial validation points that have been proved. So the way at least we think about it from the perspective of an early stage investor and accelerator is really understanding how a technology can cross the multiple valleys of death, and then think backward of, does the company and does the startup have what it takes in order to find a path through de-risking, and then find a path through de-risking not only from a technical perspective, but also from a commercial and investment capital perspective. And with this, I think Tanush just joined us back. Hi, Tanush.
Hello. Sorry about that. I'm not sure where I got dropped, and I apologize for that. Hopefully, the backup plan will work for the conversation. I think, Hera, I caught part of what you were saying there, and one of the keys in the entire path of commercialization, from idea to startup to that, is to be able to pivot. So luckily, we had the pivot here back to go from one level to the next. So I have to jump in.
Tanush, I think you're breaking in and out a little bit. I wasn't able to catch.
All right. Is this any better? I don't know. All right. Apologies, everyone. Put it up. Let me try again.
What about for others? Can folks hear Tanush well? It could just be a problem on my end.
All right. All right, I'll try one more thing.
I think this sounds a little better.
All right, is this better? All right, well, fingers crossed. We'll make that work. And I'm sorry, Hara, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question is essentially how Applied, as an example, has crossed this multiple values of death. I provided my perspective on the kind of front side as a seed stage investor, but it would be great to hear from an entrepreneur who's actually been in the trenches and doing the work.
Sure. And actually, I've seen this perspective, over the 15 years I've been in the clean tech space. I've actually seen multiple different companies go through this. So from the wind industry, going through some of those, from validated the concept to try to scale. At Uplight, it's been the whole journey, et cetera. So with Uplight, a lot of it depends on the pivots that you can make, and it depends on understanding focus on what is the next task that needs to be done. So early stage, you have some theses about what you think your value proposition is, and then you go validate those value propositions with various folks, investors, clients, potential clients, employees, other experts, the general community. In the case of the energy sector, regulators can be important as well. So we continue to go through and try to validate the hypotheses that we have. Uplight actually started in its first formation of the seed company that came in, or the constituent company that I came in through, is a company called Simple Energy. It actually started off thinking about they were going to make a smart thermostat. This is before the Nest thermostat had been released. Started in 2011 thinking, hey, what people really need is a better thermostat that's more interactive and provides a better experience than a Honeywell or a traditional, thermostat you think about from maybe your parents' house or the house you grew up in. And they started developing that technology. They realized that the capability and what would be necessary to actually commercialize what their fundamental vision was actually not within their core capability. And they shifted very quickly to software, then thinking about gamification. And so they were thinking about, how do we deliver better behavioral energy efficiency outcomes using behavioral economics through gamification. And again, that was something that other competitors took the place and validated that market, but ended up not being able to, Uplight was not able to, or Simple Energy, I should say, was not able to compete in that particular niche. And so as they were going through the discovery, and as the company was thinking about, we have these sort of value propositions, they were really, really focused on the core of what is the problem they're trying to solve. And the problem we were trying to solve was that customers had very unsatisfactory experiences. So they said, hey, we can pivot within that space. So as we're thinking about an energy consumer, what can we do to create a better experience? And through just continual pivots, by testing the cells, asking the question over and over again, getting a lot of feedback, building a big network, we discovered that the place that we could add the most value was an online utility branded transactional marketplaces. And that's where we actually got through the first valley of death to actually get a positive cash flow and actually become a sustainable company, was through a series of two different pivots. Smart thermostats first, behavioral economics and gamification second, and then finally through marketplaces. Tendril, another company that is a constituent company of Uplight, went through a similar kind of process, looking at hardware first, advanced metering technology, and kind of a home energy box that was kind of all the rage in the late aughts, in the 2006, 7, 8 timeframe. Realizing that did not work, they had to go reinvent themselves. They became a community solar software developer, realized that was not the right model for them, and then really established themselves through behavioral energy efficiency, something that Simple Energy was not able to do, but they were able to do. And then, and in the same time, developing a world-class customer experience first, demand response, really smart thermostat control algorithm. So these things converge. So as companies, these individual constituent companies had ideas, they stayed true to the North Star about decarbonization, about consumer experience, just constantly learning, figuring out the pivot, and finding the gap in the market where they could close and actually be part of an ecosystem. I think fundamentally, a lot of folks use platform as a buzzword, but thinking about not just, everyone wants to be a platform provider, right? Because they think that's the cool place to be. And by all means, that's an important element. But thinking not just about being the platform provider, but thinking instead, how do you fit into an ecosystem, and using that thinking of platform thinking to think about where is the role that you can provide in an ecosystem that's developing, has been very, very powerful, very, very key. Also, I'll just add, being an entrepreneur is very, very difficult. Our founders had to make lots of tough decisions along the way. And we jokingly talk about the therapy they've needed in terms of dealing with those experiences. It's tough to lay people up, and that's called for. It's tough to abandon something that's your product that you have a emotional connection to, but it is necessary to make those tough tough decisions as an entrepreneur to get to that first valley of death for sure, and into the second.
Yeah. And you mentioned getting validation from talking to all the different players being a very critical part of this. And as a smart energy company, your stakeholder is very diverse. You have consumers, you have other corporates, you have utilities, you have regulators. How have you navigated, this very different landscape? Have their voices clash each other, and how have you kind of try to bring them together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always this challenge of, we all want to view ourselves as big innovators, and you can go back to the story of if Steve Jobs asked customers if they wanted an iPhone, we all would have said no. I've already got a camera and I've got a phone and I've already had television and a GPS, et cetera, et cetera. And it took visionary thinking about what customers would react to. But then at the same time, having user testing, having engagement to see what the customer wants. And that's true not only for end users, but it's absolutely true for the client that actually are a direct source of revenue, which is the utility and the energy provider client directly themselves. So sometimes, we can't ask them what they want because they won't necessarily tell us a set of engineering criteria, design criteria that actually can make sense at the price that they want, in a development timeframe that they want, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to take that feedback, understand what they want, read the subtext of what do they actually need, what will they pay for, and then think about how can we mesh that with a vision of where the fundamental market is moving. So they may say they want X, Y, Z, and then we come back and say, all right, they want X, Y, Z. We know the market is moving to A, B, C. How do we develop solutions that will match both, that will actually meet their need? They'll say, yes, I'm willing to write you a check, sign a contract for, but we recognize we have scalability. We have the ability to move into the market is going. A lot of companies in our space have really been challenged by getting piloted to death. It's kind of cliche at this point, where in order to get first contract, those validations are really right. Having first contract is a big deal and celebrate, absolutely. But a lot of companies have fallen in the trap of saying, I will develop a bespoke solution that's exactly what I want. I will do it for utility A or utility B. As a result, they deliver something that's not necessarily scalable, has delivered so much that behind it, they can't pivot to being able to sell. There's always art. I don't think client figure out the balance of very dependent on circumstance company. That is your what investors you have, partners, who else is how many customers you have interested in your product, how confident are you in the market? All those things have to come in, and it takes some judgment, it takes some experience in the market, and with frankly being figure out how do I make those trade-offs between doing what my customer wants and doing what I believe.
And it seems like as a big part of your job, there is a big piece around education. The education with your corporate stakeholders, education with regulators. Can you speak to a few different examples where that education has driven interesting outcome? Like how have you seen the big incumbents? How have you seen the regulators change their attitudes and mindset based on their experience working with innovators who are on the front line working with users?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we start with a place, recognizing that almost everybody we engage with is operating based from the perspective that, right? So regulators have a very specific job to do. Utility executives have a very specific job to do. Utility program staff actually very different, actually, in the way they and then of course the end user, we have to be beginning of that and not fall in this trap of, the end user is how I think about it, how friends think about it, because we're all energy different, believing that that our experience is for everyone. And also understanding that even though it's not our experience or whatever, we have to be. We think about educating, we got to educate the user, we have to educate the executive. People like And as a result of that, we often have very specifically customized. And then we have to just approach it with ability of listening. So for example, in New Jersey, my specific area of responsibility last few years is on market development and regulation. So one of the things that we've done is just participate as much as we can in the stakeholder meeting, formal comment period, all of those things. But we do it by a lot of listening and responding very specifically, making modifications and adjustments as needed. Fundamental value is there. The market may not be set up to recognize and monetize that value. I think generally everyone understands we're in transition. Realize everyone being these activities. They all understand that we're in that transition, and so they're anxious to figure out how they can help with changing market to allow for that transition to accelerate smoothly in a way that customers are going to be happy with. So part of it is we're lucky to be in a space where the tailwinds are with us, that folks want to figure out how to do this thing the right way going forward. There's a recognized for change. And then the rest of it is just showing up, being available, and taking a problem together. One thing that we really try to do is, in my role, I'm rarely, if ever, trying to directly sell, right? I'm trying to be part of a solution, a group of folks who are working on solutions together. And so, I participate, even if it's not necessarily directly a sale. Our sales folks are very numbers driven, is very quantitative, within the year kind of driven. We build a lot of credibility to open up the space to have a conversation about how our solution can work by saying, we're not starting with our solution, we're starting with understanding your problem. We'll work together to help solve that. And then when we see an opportunity for our solution to contribute, now we've got the ability to be able to make it.
Great. That's great. Knowing that a large part of our audience are policymakers themselves, just curious, like if we're stepping a little bit outside of just the smart energy landscape, but anywhere climate tech related, from your past experience, what are some of the policies that you personally feel like have really driven the industry forward?
Yeah. So, I look back very specifically at the tax credits. So let me back up here. So one of the things that, maybe there was some master plan by the folks who put these policies in place. Maybe it was just ad hoc. We got lucky, maybe a combination of both. I tend to think it was actually the combination of both. Yeah. But it really has clean technology and really the optimism and hope that we have on the technology side. I have other reasons for optimism and hope on climate, but the reasons we have optimism and hope on climate from a technology basis has really been a combination of policy and technology and business entrepreneurs. And the policy side has been a combination of, in the US at least, federal and state policy, right? So essentially the states made the policy through renewable portfolio standards, some other policies as well. I think they were important, not quite as important or as critical as the renewable portfolio standards for wind and solar. Those policies created some market certainty of demand. Now, they would not have succeeded without the federal policy buying down the cost of deployment of those technologies through the investment tax credit, the production tax credit. So I look at hand in glove the role that the federal government had in reducing the cost and providing a directional signal, and the state governments had in creating market certainty that allowed the engineers to know that they could focus, the entrepreneurs to say, we got to build business models on actually driving down the cost through just improvements, technological improvements and the like, but also B, driving down the cost through scale economies, because there was a market so you could justify investment to then get economies of scale. And we saw incredible cost decline curves in wind and solar through the combination of state and federal policy working coordinated together. Now, just as important, but I would just think just as important has been support for the national labs, has been the support for pilot projects. Not everything is going to work every time. We're going to invest in things through DOE, the national labs, they're going to flop. A lot of money got spent on algae, for example, and algae has not delivered anything really significant in the energy sector. Maybe some other things in terms of specialty chemicals and the like are great, but not in the energy sector. But the work that NREL has done has been really critical. My training, for example, in the mid-aughts, in the 2003, 2004, 2005 period, was very well supplemented by the fact that I could get things from NREL. I got my MBA. Nobody at business school had any idea what was going on with clean energy. However, I was able to use DOE resources and LNR resources to get smart, to realize that there was a lot of good momentum going on there, get some basic education understanding. My colleagues who are more technical were able to get even more depth of understanding through the actual science that's being developed, not just the maps and the strategy documents coming out of those places. So there's other elements of policy that were really critical, other roles for government. But if you think about specifically, I think the most outstanding policy success we've had has been the use of the production tax credit, the investment tax credit at the federal level, coupled with the renewable portfolio standards at the state level.
Yeah. And then Tanusha, if you allow me here to just add a few points, I'm going to break out of my character here as a moderator and add a few points here. I think particularly for the development of solar, it's also all the market development policies in Germany, in other European countries that drove customer adoption, and all the industrial policy around factories and equipment, and then getting cheap rent and electricity for factories in China to really jumpstart a manufacturing industry. It's really a global effort at the end of the day that has built this billion dollar industry.
Yeah, I think that's right, Harriet. And I think we talk about I want to focus on U.S. policy because our audience is U.S. policymakers, but there's no question that we globally have benefited from each other's policies. So the Germans, not very sunny place, but they invest a lot in feed-in tariffs, right? And the Spanish did this, and they pulled out because they couldn't afford it after a while. But the other jurisdictions, and even in the U.S., New Jersey was the first state that very aggressive solar renewable portfolios and carve out that drove up the price to be really high, which brought down the cost. People of New Jersey have paid for the rest of us to benefit from that. So by all means, there have been jurisdictions that have stepped up, and that's a global phenomenon. The products are globally funded.
Yes. And I also know for kind of a policymaking audience here, as we're thinking about the next generation of technologies that will come up, things like green hydrogen, things like carbon capture, even the U.S.'s role in these technologies may change. I think U.S. historically have played more of a role of being on the research and development side, but depending on what strategic resources we're talking about, there could even be more of a role in terms of manufacturing, market development, et cetera, that U.S. can play. I know that there is huge efforts going on for lithium production in the Lithium Valley in California. There are a lot of talks around citing the best locations for carbon sequestration and utilization, and this is a role that United States can play, and this is a role that a lot of countries that weren't historically on the map can play, given that we're seeing a huge shift in terms of what technologies are required for us to drive towards a transformation. And Tanusha, would love to just hear what are some of the technology that excites you as you look at kind of the next decade? You've worked your way through solar and wind and smart energy. These are certainly the hottest topics in the past, currently, and is throughout the past decade. Going into the next decade, what are some of the things that excite you?
Yeah, well, I tend to be focused very much on the thing that I think is going to deploy next. And so I actually, whether fairly or unfairly, am a bit bearish on hydrogen, a bit bearish on carbon capture, just having seen that progress, bearish on algae. Where I'm most bullish are the technologies that are, I think, increasingly being recognized in the last couple of years as being ones that are at us for promising, then figuring out how we actually get to deploy it. For example, energy storage is hot right now. It's I actually played a baseball game here in Colorado with one of the folks in the Energy Storage Association. We're talking about Everyone loves energy storage. It's super useful in lots of different ways, but it isn't quite yet at the cost basis to fulfill all of the use cases that people are excited about. So we got to continue to invest in making sure that the costs come down, the batteries, actually other sources. But then thinking, there are other technologies that are actually kind of boring that are really important. Transmission, for example, not just transmission in the form of new transmission lines, which is very important, but also thinking about new applications or ways to get HVDC more cheaply. Right? Potentially think about, can we figure out ways? Massive technological breakthrough. It's very expensive now, but if there's technology that will allow us to broadly underground transmission, that would be a game changer. But I think even further than that, there are technologies that are not currently deployed that make the transmissions more efficient. So I think that current technologies, how do we incrementally better that ends up opening up?
Yeah.
But of course, where I work today, I'm most excited is about demand stability, thinking about a bevy of technologies that come together. So in the form of what can we do with solar and storage and residential or commercial? What can we do with smart stats? What is the software technology to dispatch those things? So we actually create an energy system where demand is the actual price formation input. Right now, the way energy markets work is that supply side technologies are what set the prices on real-time, hour ahead basis. We need to think about, there's massive opportunity, I would say, more that we can get demand side resources, not only from a cost perspective, not only from a carbon perspective, for solar with zero carbon resource, energy efficiency with zero carbon resource, but also from a resilience perspective, right? Resilience, we talk about grid resilience. Resilience really only matters at the customer side. It matters at the meter. Resilience is important because customers need steady sources of energy. And so if we can get more flexible in our demand through technologies, not by customer sacrificing, but by having smarter buildings, grid interactive buildings, by having stats, by having man responsive water heating, by having heat pumps with variable speed drives. Those types of technologies are where I'm the most excited, because I think that's definitely a game change in how the markets work today, and the value of resilience on top of that will be really unbeatable.
I felt like I'm in a good place because a lot of these technologies you've listed, we as Third Derivative has either have a cohort company or have invested in these technologies. And then the flip side of this is, given we have a policymaking audience here, what are some of the things on your kind of policy wish list? What are some of the policy you would love to see implemented in order to drive this industry forward?
Well, I think, I want to first say that I'm really excited about the focus of the current administration, the Biden administration, from the campaign and then through the early days, first 6 months of their administration. In the campaign, they went big on saying climate is important, environmental justice and equity, inclusion, just transition for fossil fuel workers and fossil fuel. Those were all important. Those were really the highlights. And then actually seeing the first 6 months of the administration in place and seeing what's on Congress's agenda, it's like, yeah, got it. Got to deal with the pandemic, and then we're going to lean in on climate. So that I want to caveat anything I'm going to say about specific things I wish we were doing that we're not, with this understanding that it's a whole different game than we've ever seen in the world. This historic moment in terms of a commitment to saying, hey, we're going to build a sustainable economy that's going to create well-being for everybody and solve at the same time. It's not an either or, together, economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. So that's really exciting that we have that investment. There are some things that I think, though, seem to be missing right now in some of the policy making. We don't have as much of a lean in on that demand side and getting federal support and replicating the success historically that we've had for wind and solar support into the demand side. There's the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard concept that was listed in the Biden administration's American Job Plan, but we actually have language in any of the bills. The Clean Energy Standard is there, or the Energy Resource Standard isn't there. It is. There will be money clearly for low-income weatherization, expansion of that program. We're optimistic that continued hard work and efforts. There are other programs for energy efficiency, but they tend to be in the nature of, let's throw some dollars at it, strategic approach. So if I had a wish, my wish would be that we can get some attention pivoted towards how we create the right incentive, the right policy support, ability for utilities and providers to invest in customer resources.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanush. Sorry, I think towards the end it was breaking up a little bit, so I wasn't sure. And I would encourage folks in the audience, if you have any questions for Tanush or for myself, please feel free to raise them in the Facebook channels. I think we have another 20 minutes or so, and would love to engage the audience if you have any questions.
I think if while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I think if I can talk about that policy set, like from a, I think we want to focus as the grid gets cleaner. There's some questions about whether or not energy efficiency is as valuable, right? I would say that energy efficiency is still super valuable. I'll give you an example of even if you had a high wind, high solar grid, where because energy efficiency, and not energy efficiency, but active efficiency, what the alliances say that active efficiency is important because it creates demand flexibility, and it creates the ability to better coordinate demand and act when the wind is blowing and the sun. So, we're going to have a grid, a lot of wind, a lot of solar, nuclear for sure, role for hydro for sure, could be there as well. There'll be a lot of battery storage. There'll be pumped hydro storage. There'll be other storage. But all of that stuff works much better if we have demand flexibility. The way we get demand flexibility is by investing in technologies that not only move demand, can actually lower demand, and then lower demand in ways that use our portfolio of buildings and vehicles as batteries, right? So we think about it, we need efficiency to do that, right? A more efficient car needs less use, a smaller battery to go further, right? So you can get more flexibility out of the battery if you have a vehicle to grid setup. If you actually had super efficient car, large battery, people wouldn't be worried as much about how much of the energy is attached to the grid being available to use the vehicle. Likewise, in the uplight, we find our orchestrate energy that allows us to match thermostat or dispatch system to provide demand flexibility, provide demand response, and load when it's critical. That those technologies work much better from an experience. The home is well insulated. Well insulated home can be used as a home. And then with that pre-cooling, then allow for a customer to not even notice the fact that they're actually providing grid service. So, insulation is not only virtue on its own, efficiency is not only a virtue for that purpose, but it's a virtue because it enables more grid flexibility to incorporate more real. That said, we also want to think about electrification. We're going to move more and more of our loads being through heat pumps or assisted heat, or the right technology is going to be more specific. That we will have a smaller system and therefore less dollars being spent if we have this efficient. So really, we see we're really excited about efficiency management and for cleaner electrons frequently system, but we really think of these as
And Tanush, can you also speak to a little bit just the customer demand you're seeing for these technologies? Because certainly you're the one that's more upfront working directly with users here. How much customer demand, what you're seeing out there in terms of customer demand in all of these efficient car, efficient heat pump, all these technologies that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So it varies a lot. It depends on who you mean by your customer, right? So we talk about segmenting customers. On one level, we have the customer of our direct customer, the utility. I would say very few exceptions. We've seen a massive change. I've seen it in 15 years, a massive change in how strategically critical decarbonization is to this C-suite. So, 15 years ago, it was a battle. Like sometimes we even talk about climate change. We just talked about resource allocation. We talked about, hey, we're going to go to where it's windy, those type of things. Because the utility executive like, climate change. Some of them cared personally a lot about it, but it was very few of the utilities or mission or shareholder. That is 180 degrees today. Right? Every C-suite is thinking about decarbonization. We talk about decarbonization in our sales rate every time. That is a massive change. Almost every, if not every, think about taking that. Then we think about end users. We know increasingly, at Google and Microsoft and Amazon, they've all talked about how they want to decarbonize. They're a leading client there. Walmart's been a leading client there. I think we're finding almost every client now, any major client, often because their investors are now looking at. If we saw what Engine One was able to do with Exxon's board, right? We know BlackRock.
Yeah.
I'm having friends that are being hired by BlackRock and these other folks to work and help them about their sustainability of investing. And of course, that influences the CEO and the CFO is thinking about if he or she are being asked questions about the stuff. So the customer, the industrial customers are getting there. They're not quite utilities are yet, but they are getting there as well in terms of reliability, not only for the impact climate change will have on their assets, but also their contribution will be and what liability are. So there's quite a bit of feedback there. And then for the small, medium business, or the individual customer, what we're seeing is there is interest for sure. I think there's mostly confusion in terms of what they can do through their energy provider. So I think we're seeing an uptake in interest. I think there's a willingness to. I think there's an appreciation when we provide solutions that are so easy to understand. So community solar has gotten a lot of uptake over the last few years. People understanding that by making investments, they're not only saving money, but they're actually helping and being good citizens on the grid. That is getting some traction. And so we are seeing those types of things. Are people willing to pay huge premium? Only a few cases. There's a small market segment that is willing to pay a huge premium. But increasingly, we're finding you don't have to pay a huge premium. It actually makes economic sense. So we find that as we make the experience more easy to understand and more friction-free, we're finding that customers are really accepting those, reacting to those, and they're selecting those offers. Make the offer easy to understand, the customer will choose it. Make it low cost or even cost parity, right? Or put some capital up and you'll pay back in a short period of time. You're seeing increasing customer interest in them.
Great. And is there any, in order to more properly engage, I think some of the small and medium customers, the customers who don't have investors kind of pushing decarbonization strategies from the board level down, what are some of the policy carrots and sticks you see that could be in place in order to just give that additional nudge so that the consumers are more on board with the demand flexibility strategy that you have proposed here?
Yeah. So I think tax credits are tried and true. I mentioned PTC, ITC before. Tax credits are great, and I think we're getting increasingly sophisticated in thinking about tax credits that have a natural decline curve. Right. One of the challenges is, when I was in the wind industry, we talked about, this is a temporary tax credit we need just to get over the next hump. That was true for the markets where they're very windy, right? Where I lived for many years and actually currently dialing in from here in Colorado. Great wind resource. Things are already cost effective without the production tax credit. You don't need a ton of production tax credit in Colorado, but you still need production tax credit for offshore wind, right? Offshore wind isn't quite as cost competitive. You need tax credits for places like Pennsylvania or the Northeast U.S. or maybe parts of the South still. You need that to get economic wind resources quite the same. So tax credits continue to have a place, but one of the things we might think about designing better are tax credits that have a natural mechanism to actually reduce their magnitude as the technology gets deployed. And here's an example of something that we've thought about is, and we're hoping that we can get some traction with policymakers, and we're talking to a couple of folks in the Hill about this now, is this idea of a reduction tax credit for behind the meter resource investment. The idea here would be that we would have a tax credit that is set based on the amount of carbon that's reduced by an investment. So places that are relatively high greenhouse gas intensity grids, probably shouldn't do this, but I'll call out states like Indiana and Wyoming, both of whom have great renewable energy resources deployed as well, but also still political on the system. They would be incentivized to deploy efficiency before they're incentivized to deploy electrification. Right? The idea is that we don't want to electrify a coal power grid. We want to electrify a renewable power grid. So let's put efficiency where efficiency makes sense. And then places where they are relatively clean. Texas is a great example. New England's got some good. Pacific Northwest is probably the best in the country in terms of the greenhouse gas intensity of the energy system. Let's get them and encourage them to electrify the system. So a tax credit that's based on actual carbon of the system that is then put into place that allows the flexibility for the states to set them. That would then allow the aggregator for their investment. So OhmConnect is investing, deploying 1 million free thermostats in California, right, for energy efficiency benefit. Like they should be able to get a tax credit that the same level tax credit the wind and solar folks, and increasingly we anticipate the energy storage and transmission folks are going to get, right behind the meter folks. OhmConnect should get those same tax benefits. Of course, Uplight has a different model than OhmConnect, but we would benefit, our utility clients would benefit from a similar kind of thing for all the DSM that they're deploying those reductions. Again, for low carbon intensity, it would be electrification would make the most sense. For high carbon intensity, it would be efficiency, and then transitioning as it lower carbon. So we're really excited about that. And as the ability to decarbonize, reduce, we've already decarbonized things, then the tax credit itself actually winds itself naturally. So we hope that we would have that problem. We hope we've got to a place where we're not paying any tax credits because there's no carbon to be saved. We've already saved all the carbon. But that's an interesting policy. Folks are interested in learning more about that. You can talk to the folks who are working with the Hill, Anthill, Carousel, and Wernalty, and good hand Andale, or of course you can reach out directly to us.
And then I may just have smelled a startup opportunity here, which is having robust, standardized carbon measurement and tracking across multiple different programs so that we have the visibility of exactly what are the carbon impact of the various measures that can be put in place.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work that has to be done. I think there's some really great work, and there's some great startups, right? Like or spin out your cousin or brother, sister startup out of RMI. Wattime, right?
Yes.
They're doing a lot of great work. I think you still need some regulatory work done with EPA and DOE to figure out specific of like making sure that data policy on the IRS is going to trust the Wattime stuff. But I think from a technology perspective, Wattime,
yes,
we need to do it, and they might be great at that. A little bit, we're happy.
Yeah, and then one thing that just from a investment landscape perspective, a lot of the early stage investor and late stage investor, even the hedge funds, are being pushed to have a stronger carbon measurement and tracking framework in place, but there are currently a multitude of framework and a lot of work going into this place. But I think this is a place where I certainly believe policymakers have a role in helping to standardize a lot of these work so that we can see more continuity. As a startup, grow and develop, you can see more continuity in the way they're tracking their carbon measurements and inputs, and in a way that carbon measurement can be then tied back to dollars that's been invested into the startup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I worked doing some work for the oil and gas industry, again on decarbonization and managing above ground risk, when I was at IHS, We talked about the value of regulation, not only making sure there's a floor in performance, but it's going to actually generate new innovation that will occur. Part of that innovation is around measurement, part of that innovation around new technology solutions, but new regulations are often cast politically as being job killers. Reality is that innovation will often drive new innovation, right? We had all the way back to the Clean Air Act, right? We had new SOX and NOx requirements that resulted in a lot of innovation around scrubber technology and around coal processing, things like that. That can continue as we go through, right? Oil and gas production regulation is going to generate a lot of more, or has been generating a lot of innovation around measuring, monitoring, and mitigation technology. And similarly, we can do the same for other types of regulations. Yeah, regulation has kind of a politically biased. I wouldn't say dirty because people love it, some people don't like it. Has a politically biased. Of course, we all know the actual reality of it is very different from all of it. Regulation, good regulation, be a net economic boost for us. And be flexible and pivot right level. Be fair distribution between legislature and executive legislation and FERC. We have the rights, but federal and state. Feds aren't going to solve everything. Together.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of disruptions. There's a lot of disruptions, and disruption drive innovation, and innovation can drive more innovation. We have a question from the audience here. What measures or efforts are there to ensure recycling and management of end-of-life solar panels?
So, I think it's one of those things, like often in policy world gets made up to be a bigger deal than it actually currently is. I think instead of saying specifically on solar panels or specifically on EV batteries, I think we should be thinking more systematically across all technology. Right? Currently, we don't have a system in the U.S. for the most part where manufacturers are responsible for the disposal of their equipment. So, you want to solve the solar problem in good faith. Good faith asking that question about what we're going to do with solar panels after they run their lives. First, let's acknowledge that solar panels have warranties for 20 years, but in practice have been operating for 30 to 35 years, and folks don't actually know what the life of a solar panel is before it might be pulled out and repowered. If we did pull it out and repower it, what are the recycling efforts? I think the answer to that is let's talk about putting liabilities across all industries for taking back the equipment that they produce. In the wind industry, the way that we did it was local landowners, the people, when I was a wind developer, we didn't buy the land, we leased the land, right? The landowner would have in the wind lease an agreement that before the end of the lease term, the owner was required to get an assessment of the salvage value, not today's assessment of raw material costs and salvage value, but right before the project would come, potentially be negotiated, there would be an assessment. And then if the third party mutually agreed engineering assessment said that the cost of salvage was going to exceed the cost of the materials, the market value of the materials, then a bond would have to be put into place to restore the land to the pre-existing condition. And that ended up turning in from wind leases to permits, and all our permitting requirements required that. And that is an incredibly much more stringent standard than the oil and gas industry has, right? Where production, right, for the most part, above ground production, they take the stuff because obviously there's salvage value in an oil pump or whatever. They take the well material, the drilling material, they move it to the next site. But there are all these wells that have been left. The sites have not been remediated to the state standard that we were required by the industry. So let's not talk about solar. Let's talk about solar, batteries, wind, oil and gas technology. Let's talk across the board, all sorts of industrial production. Let's eventually start talking about retail production. What the application? Again, new cost, but if it's at a cost to all technologies, then we can properly analyze that and make sure those businesses can actually make sure these.
Yeah. I love the way you frame it. This is not an externality. This is something that if we have a systematic effort thinking through end of life and valuing end of life properly, these are all business opportunities. It's recycling business. It's you can turn it back into cathodes, or you can repurpose it from vehicle batteries to stationary battery. There are a lot of business opportunities as long as we figure out the equation of how exactly we value the products at the end of life.
I mentioned that there's technological reasons I'm optimistic about climate, right? And it's cost of wind and solar coming down, it's cost of batteries coming down. I don't know if new nuclear technologies will get there, but there's something to that. But one of the reasons that I'm most optimistic has been the flow of talent into our country. Younger people, I mean, my impact, if you were to measure like over 15 years, my impact on clean energy transition, I would say my biggest impact has been helping find younger folks and giving them opportunities who've now well exceeded anything that I've done. I actually have, I think now it's like 4 or 5 who are currently CEOs of organizations and companies who at one point worked for me, and oftentimes I was their first person that would hire them into the industry. Not necessarily that I'm doing anything magical, it's just that part of what we do is and the talent flow that's coming in is really out. So thank goodness for all the excitement space, all the smart people coming in, because they are going to solve these problems. They are going to figure out how to make money, and by doing well. You're doing well by doing good is a real thing. Proven that out, and that continue to expand as the flow of talents. So that increased number of super smart people who are just out of college or just out of grad school or a couple of years out of school who are really focused or kind of make a career switch from some other career into the clean tech space is probably the biggest source of optimism for us tackling the climate.
That's a great way to end this panel discussion. I know we're at time. Thank you so much for everyone in the audience. And we look forward to continue to seeing more talent coming into this industry. And thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.